Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rocket Lasso Live. Welcome to episode 16 of season 5. How is everyone doing? Start getting those links together. Start getting those questions. If you're on YouTube, feel free to type out a question. If you have a link, you'll want to be on Twitch. Each one has its own advantages. On Twitch, you can put links in, which is amazing. But on YouTube, you can actually pause and rewind and I don't think most people are going to have to do it for me. People tell me stories that I am the exception when they're watching YouTube, that they don't have to put mine at a faster playback speed. But on YouTube, you could, oftentimes when I'm watching some sort of streamer on YouTube, I'll pause it for like 10 minutes or something, and I can play it back fast, or I can skip forward if it's something I'm not interested in. But anyway, each have their own advantages. Get those links together. If you post a link, make sure I can see the artist and or studio who put it together so we can give credit. Otherwise, we will not be tackling it. But otherwise, I think we're ready to jump in and start tackling some questions. We are going to be nearing the end of the season. We still got a little bit of time. We're going to be getting near the end as we're getting closer to half-res. Hopefully the half-res website is going to be up pretty soon. You can't get the tickets yet, but if you have any interest in visiting Chicago, then September 8th, which is the day half-res is going to be an excellent day to come visit Chicago, because there's also the DAT show, the Design and Animation Tour, is going to be in Chicago the same day, so we're going to be trying to combine the tickets so it turns into like a full day event at the same venue. So that's going to be really cool. I'm super looking forward to it. It's going to be exciting. Anyway, why don't we take a look at some questions? I see we've got some typed out questions. Interesting. Well, Demi on YouTube has a question. I like your question, Demi. I am not... Man, there's something I really want to show off that we're working on for Maxon, the next capsule we're working on. It's not quite, maybe in a couple weeks I can show it off. It's totally working, but I should ask permission if I can show it off a little bit as a little preview. Actually, I don't think I'll be able to get a word right away, but I'm going to message somebody. I highly doubt we'll get a response in time, but I want to hold off on your question until that exists, because that would make a huge difference in it. Anyway, we've got some questions up here. No, I get the message out already. But I appreciate it, Salam. Scott has a typed out question. When creating 3D landscapes with both rocks and sand, can you suggest a way to add objects like stone, blocks, architectural elements, and various old technology into the landscape and make it look like they've been there for a long time? I like the question. I mean, a basic way of interpreting the question would be, how do you integrate things into the scene? What are good ways of doing it? Man, I really, really, really wish that the bridge over to... I'd have to go back to a really old version. That seems like a bad idea. Let's switch over to this. What I really want to use is Quixel, which I think... Let me see if I've still got that installed. How do you even open it? Is it called Quixel? Megascan? I mean, I wouldn't have uninstalled it, would I? It's not popping up in my search. Give me a second. I gotta Google. because a lot of what I want to do would be Quixel Bridge. Did I uninstall that? That'd be crazy. But it's not popping up in my search. Maybe I did uninstall it. That'd be weird because I did occasionally use it, even if the bridge broke. I guess we can use some of the built-in things inside the asset browser. Like a lot of plants just came out in the asset browser. So maybe we could do a little bit of that. And I wonder, yeah, Quixel Bridge and Quixel, yeah, Quixel Bridge specifically was when I was thinking of, but thank you, Ruckus. Let me think. Wonder, because there's a lot of different approaches here. In fact, why don't I pull up one of my videos? Give me a second. I'm going to pull up the Ricochet video and kind of show a little bit of the idea of maybe some of what we might do. F drive. Yep. And here and Ricochet, launch sale, render files, videos. I'm somewhat organized here. Aha! Let me mute that. Okay, so scrub. Okay, yeah, this section here. So I was trying to do a little bit of that here where tons and tons of what you see here I manually placed. Like a lot of these plants are things I was manually placing in locations I thought would work to essentially hide seams where the rocks are. I also cloned a lot of rocks randomly to kind of, integrate things and hide other things. And playing with Quixel Megascans is a really fun way, it's a really fun process, almost like level design. I mean, that's what's mostly designed for, but it's like that rock and that rock and that rock and all these different rocks, and this is just a giant version of another rock, and finding them, scaling them, rotating them, trying to hide the seams so you can't quite ever see the same pattern twice in a given location. If I look for it, if I know to look for it, I can see, like, look at right here, you see this shape where you kind of get this little spot and you get that spot. You see that there it is again right here. Like there's a bigger version of it hanging out there. But if you layer things up well and you rotate and change scales and whatnot, your eye doesn't find it that way. And then hiding the seams, placing rocks and stairs and everything, and then hiding them with other things goes a really long way. So that's something to keep in mind as we go. Maybe I'll pull this back for reference. Anyway, I also used to spend a lot of time doing that type of material, kind of materials and generation and landscapes and whatnot. Trying to make things a little fancier. There's so many different possible approaches that I'm getting a little overwhelmed by all the possibilities, because we could just do some super duper basic things. Actually, I think I just thought of the one I want to do because it's pretty fun to layer up. So the basic idea is, well, maybe we'll even try and make it a little bit closer to real world scale. So if this is a person, we'll make a giant landscape. So let's try jumping up to, it's not gonna be enough. I'm just gonna immediately jump to 10,000. So here's a nice big, here's a pretty big landscape at 10,000. I think that's probably a pretty reasonable range to be in. And here's my raw polygon count. The higher we go, the more detail we'll get. I guess I'll try and push it to 400 by 400. So you see, we're going to have quite a range. It's not the craziest amount of distance, but we're in a live stream. We don't need to push it to insane degrees. Now, well, actually a tricky bit. I want to do a lot of displacement. I want to do that with a bunch of C4D noises, but I want to render in Redshift, and traditionally those two things could have been the same thing, but now we're going to have to make the materials separate from it. So that's going to make it a little trickier. I wonder if we can, it's tricky. Like, how do I want to go about this? Temporarily, if we go into standard and we do make some old style materials, just to show you an idea of what I'm thinking. So if I drop a material in here, we could start designing a landscape via the material channels. And if we move into something like making a classic displacer, I remember when this was a new tool and it was amazing. I'm gonna set the intensity to, let's set it to intensity. So it pushes only, well, actually I'll leave it centered, but I want to change the direction to be planar, and it'll only be pushing up on Y, and then under shaders, I'm going to say it's going to look at the displacement channel. And it's going to be looking at a material, and that will be this material. And we have the strength and everything. I don't know how tall we'll go, so let's just start with 2,000. Actually, yeah, we'll start with 2,000. Now, what's cool about this is we can move into our displacement channel and activate it and start layering up noises. So as soon as I drop a noise in here, you're going to see that suddenly we're getting displacement because we're referencing the material. So it's really nice that we have the ability to do even something basic like that. So layering up all the noises, which is, is a classic pastime. We like doing things like this where we can scale a noise up to be such a size that you can get like all these really wonderful landscape effects going. So let's do things like double that, and then you can start getting some rolling hills. Then you can change this to other types. Luke is a bad idea here because Luke is so chaotic. But if you add another 0, you can get something somewhat coherent. But Luke starts looking a little sandy. Actually, we're getting these little bumps and sand hills. That's kind of cool. But then something like Naki will drop a 0. You can start getting these hills, but you get like all this extra additional detail. But of course, the fun comes in. We can start layering up more than one. I guess I'll throw this into a layer shader. I know we're going pretty old school here, but inside the layer shader, we could be like, oh, well, that's one Naki. But let's say that we make a FBM's pretty good. I guess I'll grab a FBM. And that's going to create like all these tiny details. And we could even say, okay, well, let's push that even further. So it's like, oh, now you see we got all this tiny detail. Go up a layer and say, well, how are these mixed? And we could say add or overlay. But even right now, I could just be like, okay, we'll just do a little overlay of these two. So now something that might have been smooth is now going to get bumpy. You can layer and layer and layer like many, many different things on top of each other. And things get significantly crazier if let's say we want to try and make a river system of some sort. So if I make, I'm going to make a folder, and inside of that folder, we'll duplicate another noise. And that noise will be, do we keep it simple? Let's try an FBM, make it really big. Yeah, maybe something like that. And then I'll give it a different seed. So if we end up with something like this, I don't think that'll work too well. Let's try, this one's a little simple, but we can do a crenal. And we can end up with this type of shape. And now if I do things like play with the clamping here, we can dramatically change these effects. But yeah, see, even this one's not quite giving me the effect that I want. It's not gonna be a perfect effect, but let's, I just watched a talk from the developers of Minecraft from a year or two back, and it's amazing to the degree that this is the way they generate the worlds in Minecraft. Wait, I'm going to do something like this, and inside of that layer, do a, man, we haven't done this in a while, do a colorizer. Oh, the colorizer, all right, let's do a manual colorizer, which we get via effect. Colorizer. This one now exists in this layer. So now the idea is we're going to go from, am I doing it in the correct orientation? Yeah, I'm doing it backwards. So we need, it's going to go from white to black to white. So essentially we're getting this little cross section. And essentially what I want to do is find an area that I think looks pretty cool to return like a nice river. And honestly, that's not horrible right there. It's kind of like, okay, those are river-like. Not perfect. Different noises are going to give different results. Even here, I would probably be inclined to, let's do 5 times the scale. So now we end up with this. And I can remap it even further. The tighter we make this, in fact, we should probably make 2 right there so we can get something pretty sharp. So yeah, so you can end up with like a river type thing this way. And now if I say this entire folder, which could now be renamed river, we can say, hey, you should multiply. Yeah, so now you see I've multiplied that. So now we end up with this really deep river system on top of the other landscapes. If we remap the way that these are, you'll see we can get a softer transition out of it. So those will transition softer. So we're kind of getting a Grand Canyon type vibe. Different, and different noises we feed in here. Let's do some, well, FBM. You can see that we are getting these. Now it kind of looks like Thousand Needles in World of Warcraft. We can go back to this one. Yeah, that's just not quite scaling the way I wanted it to. And yeah, different types of rivers and canyons shapes by making that stripe. Different stripes in different areas are going to give very different effects. I will bring this back to regular old noise, though. That seemed to be working. Noise. And go up a layer. And that's the river multiplying everything out. But we probably want to calm everything down. Like, this gets pretty extreme. So we could multiply something a little bit more. But anyway, you see how they start layering. But where things in this type of setup, to me, get interesting is the idea of us moving this into another layer, say the color channel. And in the color channel, which I dragged it in, we can now make another, let me deselect that so it doesn't make it in the group, effect, colorize, and now we got another colorize. So now we know that the deepest layer is going to be this water effect. Now, actual water, it doesn't have much blue, but I'll put a little bit in there stylistically. And then let's say that we'll transition into maybe some sand for a beach. So that's going to be like a real harsh transition. Is this showing in real time? I don't think it's showing in real time. So I'm going to hit Alt-R. Not something we do very often. It's not popping up. So let's say window. Where does that live? Interact. I said Alt-R. I clicked Alt-R. It didn't do anything. Anyway, now you can kind of see in real time that we're getting some colorizing. Let's drop this way down for the quality. Okay, so. Oh, that's interesting. Colorize, height, multiply. Something doesn't seem quite right there. And we are using 3D noises. Do I need to set all those noises to 2D noises? I didn't think we did. The material seems to be getting applied after the displacement. Interestingly, if I put that into a null and then pull that out, does it change the order of operations? Seemingly no. What if I put that into a connect? I thought that would be mapping a little bit cleaner because it's the same as the height. But do you see how the stripe is on the wall instead of the ground level? Like, how could there be brown above and below? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's strange. This should just be seeing the end result of everything. Yeah, and I don't want to spend the time and convert all these back to 2D noises. We could do a height map. I don't want to do that. This was supposed to be able to take on the color attributes of the different sections, and we haven't done it in a while. I think I say I'm a little thrown off. Yeah, so those were some of the basic ideas, but the Alt-R, yeah, I'm hitting Alt-R. It's still not working. Here's interactive render region, Alt-R. I click on the viewport and say Alt-R. It's not getting rid of it. That's weird. Anyway, yeah, I'm a little stumped as to why. I would think the material applies first and it moves, but maybe it's all 3D noises. The actually, one last trick I could do there would be stick the material. That's a trick. If we don't displace and we say, yeah, see, it's applying correctly there. So it's via the displacement. So if we say render tag, where is bake hide these days? Or not bake. Material tags. Pin material. Record the position, maybe. Hey, that worked. Okay. So now each of those is looking at the relative spot. So I guess we can slightly at least finish the concept here, which is, you know, let's say that everything below that level would be water. Technically, I would just make a plane that intersects it, but let's keep the idea going. Let's say that that's beach for a while. Maybe the beach can get a little darker as it goes. And then now we're kind of on the sheer cliff. So let's say that turns into like a darker gray. And it's not as shadow. All these should scoot like way further over. And we can change the transitions where we think they're best. But, you know, we can get the stone. We can overlay several noises to get varied stone. But then let's say that once this goes up to a certain level, we can start getting some grassy features. And then that could overlay by several different noises. And if you're going super crazy, we could, you know, do a different color grass. It can slowly transition darker, and then maybe we start getting some snow up at the top and some tippy top peaks. And it doesn't seem like we have any that are super tippy top, but if we pull this in a bit, eventually, yeah, so we can start getting some snowy peaks. Now, there are a lot of things we could do to modify this a little bit, like overlay additional noises, but this is just an example of a very basic thing where we are using essentially the same noise to generate the landscape, and then that gives us information in which to apply a very simple material on top of it. I know there's the terrain shader. Honestly, maybe that would do something for us here. I very rarely, like seriously, like almost never touch it, but let's just experiment with that. I'm going to save this channel by temporarily moving it to another one. And let's try swapping this to a surface. Where does it live? Effects. Terrain mask? Is that what it's called? So if we, this seems to be angle based. There's a height, altitude. There's so many different settings with like slopes and minimums and maximums. Soften, min. Yeah, I have not played with this, but in theory, this should be able to make some pretty good landscapes. Just to see more, I'm going to load in a rainbow. So we'll load in a big old full rainbow just to see. And yeah, it's all mapped at the very tippy top. Min altitude 0, maybe. Max 2000? No. Yeah, I don't know the settings here, so I don't want to waste anybody's time where I'm just playing around. Yeah, I haven't used it too much. I'm not even sure what it's doing right now. And I'm sure somebody knows it like way better. I don't want to, but I don't even need any feedback from anybody for like ways to mess with terrain mask. It's a, you know, this is older Cinema 4D. It's not going to be, you know, like the style and everything is going to be significantly weaker than anything we would render with Redshift. So I didn't want to pursue that too far. Having said that, I'm trying to think of what would be the actual best way to get some displacement, because the displacement's using the old style shaders. Meanwhile, Redshift can't view, or how do I say this? Displacement can't view a Redshift material. So it would almost be like we'd have to make the same landscape in old standard materials, and then we'd have to make an identical setup, but with using very different nodes inside of Redshift, so they just wouldn't match that well. Having said that, what if we shift this over to Redshift and try and make a Redshift material and see if we can do some height mapping? So let's just put another material on top of that, and inside of this Redshift material, do we have, well, yeah, oh man, we don't have a fall off, but we do have state, and I am not an expert in state. Let's open up the Redshift render view. And output. Getting a hiccup there, but yeah, it popped in. Okay, so we got our basic material. I'm going to bypass everything and just grab my state and UV coordinate, ray origin, direction, position. I think there might, are there even more in there? Or is that all of them? It might be all of them. But then it gets even, yeah, the no, we don't want normal direction. UV coordinate. I'm just going to start outputting these, and I know that they're going to be outputting, I think it might be UV. No, it's definitely not UV coordinate. I think it might be ray direction. Yeah, ray direction. And that's going to be, or is it ray position? I think it's ray direction. It might be I honestly don't know. But let's go and grab a split. So there's a color splitter, and each of these is outputting a bunch of additional information. So if we split this, we can look at just one particular channel. And yeah, I'm starting to think it's not that one. Let's try, the normal of the geometry. Normal y direction. Okay, so let's try that. Normal, actually that's a good call. X, Y, Z. That's interesting, where it seems to only be colorful below, but yeah, I'm not sure about that. Is it normal geometry, perhaps? No. Is this correct? I know it even goes to like the range is way off. So we can try and remap. Is it not remap? Range. Yeah, it's called range. Change range. So if we interject range, we can say that the old range is from, I think it's from -1 to 1. I haven't done this in a while. -1 to 1. Or is it the opposite? Yeah, color splitter. Some people in the chat are not sure. Yeah. Color splitter. Somebody said vector range. I mean, that's what we're doing. Change range. The range is not quite the whole thing. Clamp to new range. Maybe this is supposed to be 0. Maybe it's supposed to be not outputting -1 to 1. That's weird. But you are seeing it's mapping some of the lower stuff, so I don't think that's quite right. That's definitely not getting the... Actually, this does make sense. That is the range we want, but it goes to the more... This would be good for creating snow, where if I put this through a... it's not called gradient, it's called a ramp. My brain is now... adapting to old standard stuff. But now we can feed this into a ramp. And let's just say we want to apply snow everywhere. I could drag this up and pull this way down. And, well, all those colors are going through. But if we fed this through, I think, the color channel and output that, would that, yeah. Now you can see this was a really nice way of applying snow. So it's like, oh, everything that was on the top side now gets snow. But we're still not getting, there's no way of us sampling the end result of the other material. I mean, I know that there was like a sampler, but yeah, we cannot drag an old cinema material into this one. And there's like an old shader sampler, but I never used that too much. I don't even know if it still exists. But yeah, makes nice snow. It's not going to colorize everything. So let me think. When it goes into this type of thing that like I would do like a lot of R&D, or you test different concepts for building out a rig. Somebody's mentioning that the curvature node is good for thin terrain. That's true. That would that pull out some little valleys and ridges for us. Wouldn't be perfect as far as being like, oh, here's where the river is. And it's essentially like that information needs to come from the plane. But I can get like crazy in depth sometimes where it's like, oh, I'm just trying to... It depends on what you're trying to make. It's so tricky. Like we can do different fall offs. We could, I mean, this is a height. This is height based. So in theory, we could project something from the side, and that would give us the height stuff. But that would be. I don't think we just want. Do we just ultimately that is translated to height? Is there a way of feeding through multiple projections in the redshift materials? I've never done it, and this is a terrible time to learn, but you can do, yeah, UV projection. So now we're feeding in a color and an out color, but yeah, here's a projection where we can say it's on different planes. So like, is this even possible? We'll try for a second. I'm gonna make a ramp. We're gonna output that as the color. This should modify our UV projection, and we can say output. So let's see. I'm a little confused why we're getting We're not doing an alpha, so why does it give us rainbow everywhere that other things are not? It's a little weird. So, but now we've got this UV projection, which is flat. We've got the scale here, and I'm never quite sure if smaller is bigger or bigger is bigger. Like if we say 0.001, is that actually what we're looking for? Yeah, you see as soon as I went smaller, that actually got taller. So we can also offset, and it looks like, well, man, even that, let's say minus 0.1. Let's say 0.1. Yeah, that moves it down a little bit. So when we say 0.5, see, I'm a little thrown off by the way these work, but I'm guessing decent number. So that's the current scale. Looks like the gradient happens pretty quick. I'm not sure if that's actually something we could map, but assuming that it is, we could get another ramp. So that one is mapped on. This one starts to become some of the landscape. So let's just experiment. Let's make that the water. If I move this down, yeah, my mapping's not going to be perfect, but let's just eyeball it. Yeah, you see that now that's there. And then let's say that transitions immediately to some sort of dark stone. And then that'll translate into some slightly lighter stone. And we'll get the green back in. Is this... Okay, yeah, you can see our mapping is pretty small down there. Change that saturation way down. This should have been way less saturated. You see our mapping is very small, so we need to, yeah, it's like 0.00001 to get that particular projection mapping going, and that's planar. It's based on the world. I'm not sure if basing on the object will do, no, object didn't seem to change it. Reference object, maybe that would adapt to the size of a reference object. I don't see where we feed in a reference object. So yeah, I end up with a lot of unknowns here, which is not a great thing to do during a stream. We don't want to do any of this UV scaling. I think it's all these transforms, but I don't think, well, we could technically put another 0 here. Cinema can handle another 0. So now, yeah, now you see it's way stretched, but there's probably some multiplier because I made it 2,000 tall, so some multipliers needed for that. You see where I'm kind of introducing some of these gradients, and they're able to remap the overall space. Like that went really small, but if I keep pinching it in, like eventually we'll see like some of the stuff pop back in again. And as somebody was, and so you start thinking, you start thinking of these things as ingredients where we've got, it's like, we've got this one ramp and that can give us things based on this vertical, not there. We get these things based on this vertical angle, like whatever settings we want to do there. And then now we've got this ingredient, which is, and this is so much better in the world of nodes, but we got this, in theory, if we get the projection working correctly, we would get like this mapping from the zero height all the way to the peak. And then we can make another one where we can do the curvature and we can feed that through. And you think of this as another ingredient. And this is, okay, can somebody explain why I'm getting these rainbow colors? Is it just because I'm outputting straight from surface and not this thing? It's still really throwing me off. Like, I guess when nothing's piped in. Okay, if nothing's piped in, this outputs a rainbow. Maybe there's a setting for that. I guess it doesn't really matter. But yeah, here's this curvature. Curvature has like a million little nuances for like the way you need to run it. Like that's convex, but then we have a radius, but this thing's really big. So let's try cranking the radius up to 50. Visually didn't make too much of a difference. Convex, there's a big difference between convex and concave. Even 50 radius didn't really feel like it made too much of a difference. Yeah, I'm cranking this up to be ridiculous sizes and it doesn't feel too different. It is emphasizing those little gaps. I'm just going to keep going bigger and bigger until it does something. Seemingly, it's not doing anything. So let's say 0.05, go smaller. Yeah, okay. That doesn't seem to ever change. Oh, that's an interesting question. It was the rainbow coming from the standard material. Yeah, seemingly it did. The rainbow did come from the standard material. I didn't know what to do with it. But still, you see the whole thing turns red if we don't plug anything in. So, not super different. The curvature at this huge scale isn't seeming to change much. I mean, this mode and the radius should be the most important, but you'll see that if I do 0.05 or 5,000, I'm not really seeing much of a difference between those two. It works a little different than the old ambient occlusion. I know we've got these old ones, but I don't think those are going to be much different either. Yep. Not much different at all. Super tiny, super huge, no difference. So, But well, anyway, my point was, like, you can think of these as like all these different little ingredients that you can start layering together, where it's like, oh, well, here's this ramp getting us these colors, but if we made a layer, so we do a color layer, we could make this the base color and then make this ramp a secondary layer. And now let's look at what the output of that would be. So color layer, and now we've got the secondary. Yeah, that is activated normal. I feel like we should be seeing something. Okay, we're seeing something. Normal, yeah, that overrides, but now we could say, I want to see, let's say overlay. So now you can see that we got one on top of the other one. So then if we took that as the result and then remapped that via a ramp and then feed the color out, then we're going to get this colorizing looking a little bit different. So that, I guess overlay is probably a little powerful. Let's say movie screen. Let's try multiply. Nope. It's probably screen then. Or add, yeah, so screen, that's going to, you see the green is now sneaking up and down a little bit more than it had been. More noise overlays. We're not making anything that looks really nice right now. And I have made, well, I'd like to think I've made some really nice landscapes, but I'm trying to think of, you know, I was trying to kind of generate a whole landscape. And what's kind of cool if you did this type of process is we can always go back to that original material. And, oh, and that's the rainbow we were getting. That makes sense. But if we go to displacement, we can go back into the original material, and I can say actually go into the river and into that noise, and let's say the river is smaller, and now you see, oh, instant different landscape, and everything in theory updates. That's where the power of this type of thing comes in, is you can generate infinite landscapes, like offsetting materials, etc. Now, one thing I was sort of mentioning was I wouldn't make, you know, I wouldn't actually make the ground blue. The better thing to do would be to probably make a volume. How big do we make that plane? So let's make this super huge and then say that's 1,000 tall. So now we get this big, oh, let's even go 2,000. So we get this big old box covering up everything, and I would scoot it down to whatever level. And now we just make a nice water material. Drop that on our water object, and you know, we go to water. That is going to require, yeah, yes, reflection, lots of transparency, and it's got the refract. I think water is 1.5. We still got the blue here, so that's going to be making that pretty ugly. Let's just say it turns a little bit brown. So then we've got the water, and this is this big box. Now we, so what, yeah, I think it's not blur. I don't want blur. I kind of feel like, what, oh, absorption. Is there an absorption? Nope, nope, nope. Transmission depth, maybe. One, does it turn black? No. Maybe depth isn't what I think it is. I don't think it would be subsurface, but that does have the absorption. The two fight each other. Is there, and Zach, if you're here, you would probably know, what would be, is there a setting which is like the deeper we see into something, the more opaque it becomes, like the old way that we could make like Coca-Cola in like the old standard renderer? Oh, okay. Okay, so you're saying depth would do it, but okay, there we go. I needed to give it a color to do it. So let's just say that the water's going to get murky. So we'll make it kind of a brown, pretty dark, pretty desaturated. Okay, cool. So now we can start giving this a lot of depth. And then you see, yeah, now you see how it kind of starts fading in. Pretty much exactly what I was going for. So the deeper the water, the darker it will become. You could do lots of fun different colors here, depending on the way the water should look as it gets deeper. And then water-wise, obviously, some bump is going to go a long way. We'll need a bump map. We'll need a noise. And it's going to have to be huge. But we'll just drop that into the bump map. And keep in mind that the scale is always probably going to be inverted again. Let's say bump map, scale height, I'm going to say 10, which is, you know, a lot, but at the scale we're at, it's not that much. So noise scale, speed, I'm not worried about that. Input, overall scale. So I'm going to try 0.001, see if I can see it. Oh, you know what I should do? Let's not guess and check. Let's just output. So does this get bigger? Okay, cool. So we do want to make bigger numbers. So as I go bigger, it looks bigger. So this noise, wavy turbulence, that one usually looks nice. And then that can go down to something relatively small, like 10. I mean, that's still probably too big, but we'll be able to actually see it. Stretch it out if we were so inclined. And that becomes the bump. This becomes the output. And then we should probably make a sky. Dome light, materials, nicely organized now as HDRs. I'll just grab something outdoorsy. Yeah, here's one that doesn't look like pavement. Drop that in. Let's turn off the background. And instantly, the HDR is going to go a long way. And now look how, obviously ignore the water on these outside bits. But now you can see the water start fading in. We start getting some reflections. The overall material is still really reflective. So lots of diffuse. Honestly, probably should have very little reflection, or at least a lot of roughness. Flatten that all out. So if we started framing ourselves up a little bit better. This is a HDR, probably having some distinct sunlight from a particular direction could go a long way. But, anyway, you can see the basic idea where we can start layering up, landscape stuff. We could be making displacement on the ground here, so you can see more of that. And in theory, infinitely it's all procedural, so it's infinite terrain. But I still don't think we're getting at the meat of what the original question was. I'm going to stop the render. Let's save the file. Are there some good ways we could scatter materials? And believe me, I have spent a lot of time building rigs that are along these lines. So do we just throw away everything we've already got here? Get something a little simpler. I'm kind of thinking yes, or at least a lot of it. Maybe we don't have to throw it all away, but let's simplify a little bit. In our displacer, we'll just make our own custom shader, where we will make a layer, and inside the layer, I mean, we could do this with, actually, let's do it just for fun as an alternative. Let's do this via plane effector. Possibly we could even, if we're doing this all with fields, we could potentially feed the fields out as a vertex color map. Probably not the quickest thing, almost guaranteed not, but let's deform based on points, based on the effector's position, pushing everything up or down up to 2000. And inside the field, we can start, actually, I'm going to immediately make a group field. And now inside the group field, we can start layering things like make a random noise that is opening up noise by default. So we can start doing things like scaling that up to 10,000. Start getting something a little coherent. Let's try that wavy turbulence just for fun. Yeah, that's kind of fun and ridgy. 5 times bigger? Yeah, okay. So now so let's just say we're starting to work on like a desert landscape. So we'll keep it a little more simple than we had before. So we can do something like that. If we wanted, is there a way of extracting, I mean, we just got straight up depth here, but we can't get a specific angle. But, yeah, let's say we've got that. That's fine. I was going to say maybe we can incorporate like those drifting dunes. Maybe even that's a good idea. But even here, what am I thinking? We could merge 2 different landscapes and put different materials. But something we could do that might work all right is, let's just call this rocks. And now I'll duplicate that, and let's call this one sand. So now we got 2 different things. Let's stop generating that one for a moment, and now we'll go into this random field and say, all right, well, we already saw that a really large Luca, a really large Luca was giving us something that looked a little bit like sand. Yeah, so we can do something like this. See how these are drifting around. Now, there's other noise types that can do a similar thing. You get they start peaking a little bit more. So maybe instead of Luca, what's the one I'm thinking of? One gives really good dented sand effects. Which one is it? Maybe it's Chronal. Yeah, so this always looks really weird like this. But if you use a light touch and we do the inverse, which it's a field. So let's just go into our group field, and we can do this a bunch of different ways. I'll just do it via curve. So I can say flip horizontally. So then we end up with this shape. That's a little extreme, but if we say start calming down the height a little bit, you see that we start ending up with like these little bumps. I'm still kind of feeling like it's not this noise. Do we get octaves? There's no octave setting. Where did I used to make nice dents? Because when I designed top coat, there's like a really, really good dent, and I'm honestly blanking on it. Actually, it's probably one of the Voronoi. It's not refreshing always. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit more what I wanted. Okay, so let's re-mirror. There we go. That's more along the lines of what I wanted. So, it's going to look like that by default. But if we start remapping things, we can get something a little bit more like that. And actually, if we ease into that curve, that'll smooth those out a little bit. So, yeah, look at these lovely kind of desert dune drift type things. So, if we turn this one back on, we get the option of combining these things, where I could just grab this sand and be like, all right, well, I'm just going to like let it intersect. And, sometimes we'll see sand on these lowlands, like any low areas, we'll see it. So that works pretty well. But we do have other options where, I don't know if this is a good idea, but what if I say, hey, give me, I'm going to copy, let's rename this. So this is going to be plain dot rocks. And now here's plain dot sand. But what if I'm going to duplicate plain dot rocks, and I'm going to say, hey, reference that same group. So that's doing something identical, but I'm going to move it over here. So now the sand, which, let me zero that back out again. So now they're doing identical things. So after it makes these rocks, I'm going to be like, okay, now deform that again, but do it with the sand. So now we got sand on top of rocks. But, and it, that looks kind of cool. But let's just say I kind of wanted to follow this, but I could say, hey, this one should be a little bit weaker. So we could say, don't push it quite as far. So now, generally speaking, it is following that displacement, but not all the way, not up to those really tall peaks. And then I can say, and then, do I want to do it here? It's going to take a little bit to calculate, but I think I'll just grab a smoothing and say, okay, after it generates the rocks layer, let me make a different color. I think this material is overriding. Let me say, don't show the materials. Remind me later. I'm going to forget I turned this off, and then we're going to get thrown off. So you can see we've got kind of this rocky layer, which if we're going desert, let's go a little more red rock. darker, redder, brighter, desaturated. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so now you can see I've got a second layer. I can say, hey, this one, you know, it's not going to be quite as powerful, so it's going to follow the landscape, but not quite as much. And then for now, so we can see it, I'll scoot it up so you can see, okay, so we got the secondary layer, and then the smoothing is taking those hard edges off. So I can say, hey, give me all the smoothing, do a couple extra iterations, and now we got a smooth version that's generally following the landscape. So by taking that and moving it up or down, we now follow the landscape better, meaning when I turn on the sand, that happens on top of it. It's pushing everything way up. But when I move it down, the hope is that these in general will be moving in a similar way following that landscape. So now we can choose via this height, like how much should it be trying to match those heights. So I can pull back where it's like, oh, in general, some will sneak up a little bit. The sand dunes are nice. I think they're a little strong, so let's only deform 1,000. And now everything needs to move up. Yeah, a little softer. And now we start seeing those sand dunes sneak in. I think a little smaller would be nice, so let's grab this random noise, drop it to half the size. So, and it's not refreshing, so off and on. Now you see a smaller sand dunes, which probably means a little less displacement again. That's fine. Easy setting, 500. Excellent, that one actually updated. Pull this up, and now you see, okay, now we get sand dunes, but sand dunes that are, they have a relationship to the landscape around it because we're actually layering up the noises. And what's great is this rock copy is referencing the other rock, so we can just change this bit of landscape at any point. We can be like, you know what, give me a different seed, and now you can see this, like, oh, that's a different layout, but the sand is still going to be falling in the lower areas, not strictly stuck in the lower areas, because you see we get a little bit in this pit, but in general it's like, oh, sand is in the lowland. So, and we can keep on changing the seed, and both are compatible, both are linked up. So yeah, this is really cool. I already am super digging the way that these are interacting. Now, technically, we could have been doing everything I just did inside of the noises. Like, we didn't have to be layering this up as separate objects, but by separating out the objects, I definitely feel like I've got more of an intuition of what controls I'm throwing at it. So this is already looking like way better, and I love the way that the sand is kind of mimicking the landscape a little bit. And yeah, finding a nice angle here to get some nice landscape, I don't think would be terribly difficult. What are, and yeah, our ability to get them in these little pits and whatnot, like, that's really cool. Can we turn off the wireframe? Yeah. So let's make that look a little bit sandy. Proper sand color is a little tricky to achieve. And the rock's a little darker. Just kind of make it up. So now you can see sand intersecting at certain areas. So, you know, that works pretty well. Pretty happy with the way we're getting that control. Wasn't difficult to make. And what's cool is, you know, because this is all based on fields now, like, there's a lot of things we could do where we could be like, oh, emphasize a center area, do a big spherical fall off, or, you know, potentially we could, you know, animate a vertex map to make it grow in from a particular corner in a very, like, randomized type of way. And of course, everything here is procedural. Something that's cool is you can always grab the random landscapes, and they are based on the field. So let me save this. There's a lot going on, but I should be able to just take these and physically move them, and look, I can just scroll to more landscape. So essentially we get infinite landscape. We can explore infinity and find, like, lots of different areas, much like you might think in something like Minecraft. So that gets to be pretty cool. As we zoom out, you're going to see that everything becomes very imperfect, but if we zoom in, you know, these should become, you know, you see they don't pop when we're actually zoomed in, and this should be what it actually renders as. Now, you will get these jaggedy corners where those two things intersect. I can't think of, I'm trying to think of, you know, how do I want to start, you know, what's the next layer? What do we want to do? Like, my first thought is, like, we want to get maybe some rocks going and maybe some brush. And it kind of goes to, where do we want those things to exist? And I don't even have a plan right now for placing things kind of properly. Let's go to models and search for the word, I don't know, rocks. Let's see if there's any rocks. So yeah, we've got some rocks. They are set up for redshift, which is nice. I don't know when these came out, but, you know, we got a couple boulders. So what do we got? I'm going to download that one, and this one, and that one, and that one. I like the look of those. So let's try grabbing all of those. See if I can drag them all out. Yeah, there's a thing where you can't drag more than one object out, but we can right click and say load, and it will manually load all three in along with their materials. So there's a little trick for you. Okay, we got all these rocks. They're probably gonna be really tiny. I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. Okay. Okay. We zoom in. You see, we got these tiny little cute boulders down on our fella. So we got a lot of options here. We could just randomly distribute these, and honestly, that might not be a bad way to go. If we take these overall rocks and we make that a point we can clone onto, we make a cloner, drop all these into said cloner, clone onto an object. The object will be an object. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a count, which is smart, so we can put this here. So it is cloning a couple of them. You see there, we got one copied. I think that they do definitely have an orientation that looks better. So let's transform these to rotate 90 degrees. I guessed correctly on the first try. It's a miracle. Generally speak, well, I guess we'd probably make more than one cloner. But if we say multi-instance, we should be able to make like a lot of these like pretty quickly. So we can like really populate a whole bunch of them around. Their density is purely random, which in general is going to mean they're going to start looking fairly evenly distributed. But let's just see how far we can get with a random. So if I make a random effector and we don't want to change their position, potentially we can make them move up and down like a little bit, but scale and rotation are the important ones. So we can spin these, which axis? Not that one. Okay, third time's charm on that one. So we can say spin these up to 720. And so now they're pretty much perfectly randomly spun. We could say spin a little bit like one direction or the other. And scale, I'd probably add more than one. It's good. And I control these separately, but let's just say we're doing scale, and I will say a uniform absolute scale. And now they could double in size, triple in size, 3 or 4 times their original scale. And you see that's really going to open it up. And I think that they'll start hiding the pattern a little bit. They feel less uniform in spite of being on top of each other. And in this particular way we're building it, I don't mind them intersecting each other. A little bit of scale goes a long way to making them not look like the same rocks, much like I was saying with the other one. This whole thing was uniform scaling, though. So let's just say random dot scale plus rotation dot uniform, just to tell me what that one's doing. So now selecting that cloner, and we'll call it the cloner dot rocks. I'll say you get another random, and this random is not going to affect the position, but it will affect the scale again, and this time I'm going to do some random scaling. So if I say 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, now they're allowed to scale non-uniformly, but honestly even 0.25 is too much. You start feeling the stretching, but a little stretching can go a long way to making the stones not feel like each other. And then one last trick I might do, keeping it relatively clean and simple, is let's say dot scale is I will make, let's see if I can remember how to do the formula. I'm going to say, hey, you get a plane effector. I'm going to call this one, don't move the position. You will be affecting the rotation, and I want to rotate 180 degrees. So I'm going to, in theory, did I do that right? Let me spin. Okay, I see I'm spinning them upside down. Now, we didn't, all the ones we're seeing are sitting right side up. We're spinning them, but they're sitting right side up. Right now I'm spinning all of them 180. And remember, the rocks seem to have an orientation. So spinning them 180, this is also a good orientation for the rocks. But what essentially I want is half of them to be upside down, half of them not to be upside down. So if we go into the fields, we got a couple different methods. I think we could just do a formula and look at the variables, and we can type in mod bracket ID colon semicolon 2 bracket. If I did that right, yes. Okay, you can see every other, essentially in aggregate, every other one is turning this teal color, and that's because color is coming along for the ride. I'll just turn off color. So now what I just did via formula is said every other one randomly flip it 180 upside down. So now we've essentially doubled the variety, because half of them are perfectly upside down while maintaining our general orientation. So, you know, that's something that we can do. Now, I mean, I'm not sure how those will render. Let's pop open. We still got the lighting and whatnot. So let's see what this renders like. Why not? We don't have any fancy materials on our rocks right now. We can take a look if we've got any good ones. But let's just see how it looks generically right now. The initial hiccup is always going to take a little bit of time. Okay, they are very green, but the rocks look okay. Oh, those still have those. These still have those landscape materials. So let's do a little cleanup in here. Essentially, we don't need any of that stuff. We'll just start again from scratch. So we got our basic landscape, and a trick I like doing is I colorize the sand and I colorize the rocks. I could say search for the word user, color user data, and say, hey, give me the object's display color. Feed that through the color channel, and now it will automatically colorize each one based on the object. Now, obviously, we're going to make a different sand material than a rock material, but this was a shortcut for me being able to control like key colors in the viewport instead of in the material. So it's a good way of using a material in make one material and apply it to lots and lots of different things and make them look different from each other. So looking at our landscape, it's feeling a little bit flat. Like these rocks look okay, but the lighting is very indistinct. We'll try a different HDR just to, I mean, if we're spending a little time trying to make it look somewhat nice, we might as well go all the way. Auto, not rock, HDRs. I don't have a particular favorite. I'm just trying to find one that's got some, this one looks like it's got some slightly more distinct angular direction for the lighting. It's gonna take a second to load in. Loads in. That updates. Okay, so definitely a little bit more distinct, a little moodier, definitely a little darker, but I'm fine with that. Okay. Okay, so material-wise, what are we thinking? What are we thinking? I don't want to spend a ton of time doing it. Who asked the original question? Scott. Yeah, interested in solve for big lands. Something similar, interesting solution. Scott, what are the aspects you are most interested in? Because there's a lot of directions we can go. I want to maybe sprinkle around some desert plants as well, but so some thoughts I have. But essentially we could spend infinity amount of time here. Right now we're randomly distributing. One thought is, well, maybe we can modify a rig so that the rocks are only appearing in certain places. Where it's like, oh, these areas will have more rocks, these won't. But is it more like, oh, how do we hide the seam between the sand and the rocks? Or is it like, oh, let's make a really nice looking rock material? Or like essentially, what are the aspects you're most interested in? Build up the sand around the objects. Interesting. Okay, so actually this rig might work pretty well for that. Build up sand around the objects. If the idea is, what I'm going to do, we're going to attempt to make a copy of these, and I'm going to call this boulders. And what we're going to do is make a couple, let's make 50, maybe a lot less, but I'm going to make 50 way larger boulders. Can we do that just here? Will that, okay, yeah. So here's the idea: is we're gonna make some bigger rocks. So essentially, yeah. Actually, I don't dislike that. So we've made a couple of really big rocks, and if the idea is like you want sand to show up on the borders of where all of these are, is the way I'm interpreting your question. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm currently aiming for. So that's what I'm gonna do. Now, because of the way we've built this rig, I feel like we've got a lot of good opportunities to do that. I want to think of ways that aren't going to like completely kill us. You can see the subdivisions of the rocks are significant. I'm actually surprised how, look how dense those rocks are. When they're this big, it's like, oh, that seems reasonable. But when they're this tiny, it's like, wow, that's a lot of polygons. Okay, so is there... Honestly, I can't think of... I'm going to try the brute force way just to see what happens. Let's turn off the rocks just so it's a little quicker. And let's make ourselves a brand new displacement to layer up with these other ones. So we've got the base level rocks, and then we smooth them out. After that happens, I'm going to make another deformer. Let's turn off this one. So now we got this rocks deformer. And I'm going to say you are not referencing a group field. Although, maybe I'll make a new group field. So let's make a boulders. So there's a boulders folder. So now I'm going to say, I want you to reference this cloner, and I want you to view it as a point object. Now, there's a good chance that's going to be crazy slow. Okay, it didn't freeze. I was a little worried I just froze up. I will save it as the next version. Okay, so we're looking at the boulders and we're looking at the individual points of the object, which is possibly the best version of this, but we have a very small radius. So let's say a radius of 200. See if anything seems to happen. Don't worry about colors, don't worry about direction, that's just pointless calculation. We're in this plain rock, set to normal, which doesn't really make a difference here. But I'm trying to reference this geometry, but right now it doesn't look like it's seeing it. Not necessarily surprising. Oh, yeah, and it's a render instance. I'm going to say be a regular instance. Give that a second. Okay, it didn't crash, and we're not cloning too many, so I wasn't too worried about that. But I'm going to, now that they're real geometry, we should be able to put them into a connect. So I'll say connect, don't weld, bake these all down to a single object. And now that they are one object, we'll tell this new rocks boulder to view that geometry instead. So let's try and view the cloner dot boulder. This one. Oh, no, it's in the group. Okay, something's happening this time. So it was not successfully seeing the points, but this is where, yeah, when in doubt, use a connect object. So now we are indeed seeing those points. Now that we are seeing the points, we can say, okay, cool. Points is because we do have a lot of points traveling around it, it's actually pretty good. We can do surface, and surface would actually give us better results, but it's going to be way slower to calculate because it's trying to, you know, instead of just making a little radius off everything, it's trying to calculate the surface. It just takes longer. Well, anyway, now if we say 200, now you can see that we get this lovely outline around all of those big boulders, and this pushing way up. Now I'm going to say, just to show you, yeah, we're in a relatively safe scene. Like there's a large number of polygons, but not a million. If we change it to surface, you can see that, well, it barely changed, so you know that didn't do too much. But we could say base it on the volume, and now it's seeing the internal structure of it, and now you see that we get like it doesn't forget that inside part. But I think points is going to calculate the quickest, and I don't mind that the inside isn't going to be caught. But the important thing here is this is another deformation, so this is going to be plain boulder sand. And now I'll just take our parameter and start pulling way back on that. In fact, why don't we start at 0? And all of this is additive on what we already have. So as we start to increase this, you're going to see that in these little areas where those boulders are, those can now start pushing up just a little bit. And depending on, like, we already had other random layers that were saying like, yes, put sand there, or no, don't put sand there. So you'll see this one, I just push it up enough that that one's doing a really nice job. But you see this one over here, this one is in a very rocky area. So yeah, it's starting to sneak into some of these low areas. So the further we push it in one spot, the more it's like, okay, now this is going to maybe start overdoing the sand. But we can see it start appearing on these other ones. Also keep in mind, I guess it's just where it's intersecting, so it should be that. But honestly, I think that's working pretty well. It's starting to push up a lot in those areas, so maybe I'm going to lower it to 75. All right, I'm going to raise it until at least this one looks pretty good, which, yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. And then maybe let's go easier on the smoothing. Let's turn off the smoothing for a moment. Yeah, turn off the smoothing, and then we got these rocks, and this is modified from the other one, where the other one was like 2,000. But maybe we could say, okay, the sand is just barely hiding below the surface, and that's going to go a long way. So if I say 2,000, which is the original deformation, you see we're overwhelming everything. And let's turn that off. So now I'm going to pull. Okay, so you see I'm pulling this down, and now you see they're pretty much like they are identical right now. So I'm going to go just a little bit higher than it. And then, let's see, if I smooth, and then let's do our rocks and sand, that should push everything up. Yeah, that pushes everything up a lot, so we could go a little bit more mild on that. So now it's just, it's about finding the balance between these things. So now, if I, yeah, it's really, really, really about finding the balance. So I'm going to lower that down. 100. So now stuff is a little bit more in the pits, but it's not so far down. So yeah, now it's emphasizing the pits. And now that we've done that, if I, let's turn that off for a moment. No, I guess we'll keep it on. If I pull our boulder offset, now you see that even this one's getting covered pretty well because we didn't sink everything really deeply under the ground. And now that that's only pushing down a little bit, we should be able to go way lighter. So let's say like 75, and now actually we'll say 0. And just work our way up until we see the sand. And honestly, I don't even think you'd want it's stylistically, it's a thing that you'd have to decide, but do you want the sand to be like perfectly outlining it, or just in general you're going to see more sand around the boulders than you would in other areas? So those layer pretty well. It's a stylistic thing. We could layer multiple things. We could honestly make a second sand layer and just not even worry about it, let them intersect with each other, which actually could give pretty nice results. I guess I don't dislike this, but I liked the sand when it was in the pit a little bit more. I thought it just looked kind of cool. So I'm going to go back to when it was more exaggerated. Yeah, I think here. We turn on sand, turn off that, and turn on smoothing. Okay, so now we're back to where we were. Now we get the sand in the pit. I just like the way that looks. So I'm going to duplicate the sand again, and now let's just say sand outline. And with the sand outline, yeah, I want to match the rocks like perfectly this time. So now we'll say it's 2000 to match, and the position of this should be back to 0. So now we're matching, and then eventually we're gonna get the sands peaking up. So now everything. Oh, and I probably don't even need the smooth we probably want the smooth just to have the sand be smoothed out. So now we can move all the sand below the ground. Oh, and let's hide that one. Okay, now we're just seeing this new sand. So now it is smoothing out. So I guess some of them are just going to fall in the cracks. Just by smoothing, that actually fills in cracks automatically. And now as we activate our boulder outlines, this should be very, very cleanly and accurately outlining the boulders, because it's all just right there barely below the surface. So as we increase this to counter the amount we had, we should just get a better job of getting outlines from there. So yeah, I think that looks pretty, that's working pretty well. And we can activate, so that's now the sand outline. We can activate this and just let those two sands intersect with each other. If we project the sand material kind of top down, I don't even know that we'd see this intersection too much. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. We got various means that we could throw this into a volume builder or something and have them actually blend into each other, etc. So we got options, but that was a way of separating out the rigs, and you're art directing the pieces individually. So that's a thought. Lignazio, thank you for subscribing. Your 15th month. So if you want to help support Rocket Lasso and you have Amazon Prime, you, I think, have a free Twitch subscription. So you can link your account and then subscribe for free. Yeah, so that layers up pretty nicely there. Let's see if they got any sand materials. Honestly, sand is one you can definitely just find like a photo online, and then it'll tend to work pretty well. I'm going to search for the word sand. Oh, we actually got quite a few different options for sand. Let's go to materials and search sand. Okay, there's ceramics, but there's no, actually, I should make sure. Some of these might be Grayscale Gorilla. I always forget to check that. Yeah, this is from Grayscale Gorilla. So the reason I've got some sand is GSG had some images based on sand. And I forget how to stop those from searching, but I imagine anything that has this D in the front and GSG. So I'm not sure what kind of sand we have default. I feel like we could do a lot with just noises. Noises are not the quickest thing to calculate. Sandstone. I mean, some of these sandstones might look nice on our rocks. So this looks like it is just a Maxon asset. So I'm going to download that sandstone because it looks pretty cool. Let's try throwing it on our ground. Not the sand, but the ground. So we'll drop that on our rocks. And I guess, yeah, let's just search for a sand image. So make a new window, Google image search. Let's just search for sand. We'll say images, and then we'll say tools, usage rights, Creative Commons, and yeah, now we just find an image we like the look of. We can say large, just to get them a little bit bigger. And I'm looking for, honestly, something pretty zoomed up, something without a lot of variation. Either we want a really big material with a lot of variation. This said creative usage. Oh, that's maybe a little too small. Sand texture, you never know. Nice. I don't want to see any of these waves or anything. We'll add that in after the fact. Seamless desert sand texture marked for usage. Excellent. From HHH316. Good enough for me. Let's, it said seamless already, so I'll just say save image as episode 16, scene files, new folder, texture, save. I'll keep this window open so I can include a link to that. Cool. Now in this material, we haven't made one, so we'll just make a brand new material. We'll call that sand. Inside of sand, we will load an image. Is it called image? Yeah, texture. Thank you. I'm glad things have metadata. Let's just grab, I don't have a folder handy, so search the path. Last time I grabbed a texture, I was making the folding tutorial. Scene files, texture, sand. Okay, so let's output that to the color and keep it simple. So now we've got a color. It's going to be very reflective. We're not going to want the whole thing to be reflective, so I'll just get rid of all the reflection for now. If we're going to spend a little time trying to make it look nice, we'll definitely put some tweaks on there. Honestly, we can do some pretty flat projection here. So let's delete that material. Apply sand. It's just going to be essentially applied 2D wise, but now we can say tile it, and it's going to be pretty tiny, so I'm thinking tile 100 times. Redshift render view. Let's see what we get. I could even imagine, we got these lovely boulders going, but I could even imagine just throwing that sandstone on them so it blends in with everything a little bit more. There are a lot of instances in secondary rocks, etc. Actually, I turned off the little rocks, but it's going to take a little bit to update. Hopefully we don't freeze. Okay, cool. Okay. The sand is looking okay. Sandstone shader. Oh, I thought that this was, okay, this material is from, oh, it's all noise-based. It's not, I thought that this was a Redshift material, but it's not. And they just layered up a bunch of noises, which is pretty cool. Like, the noises look really nice. It's a nice-looking sandstone, but I don't think there's a good way. I'm going to try converting it, but I don't think it's going to be able to handle those layers. How do we, is there a convert? Create Redshift utility. Nope. Is there any sort of convert, and is there any chance that's going to do anything useful for us? Ooh, wow, that has not been updated in a long time. That is, oh, we'll fit it in the shader. It's a little clunky, but it might work. I mean, it's not the, definitely not the, it's a sandstone. Maybe we can get away with it. Let me try dropping it in and see if it looks any better. It's hard to tell if it's updated. Refresh. Updating geometry. It's getting a little, yeah, I don't like all this hiccups is getting. Oh man, it turned into let's just say melted chocolate. That's no good. Okay, so sandstone, dead end. Get rid of that. Okay, so anyway, we've got our normal sand. Let's just not worry about our rocks yet. Sand, that's the one I really want to see. So we're going to zoom up pretty far. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to do refreshing here. We can turn off those rocks, but keep in mind this, this redstone is not what we're going for eventually, but let's see. Figure. Here's our little fella. Very much underground. Okay. So let's zoom on up. That should give us an idea of scale at a perspective. As a general rule, if you can make the sand look nice zoomed up, then when you zoom out, you get the rest of it kind of for free. So in the sand, what are some changes I like to make? It's very yellow right now. So I'm going to make a color correct. And immediately, Redshift is good. It's every time we make a change here, the render is going to be like, oh, I need to update, which, in some ways is kind of good, but it's really going to choke everything we're trying to do here. Saturation. I know a little desaturation goes a long way, so I'm going to try 0.75. Yeah, that desaturated significantly. We could increase the contrast a bit, 0.75. No, I don't. Well, maybe if we make the gamma a little brighter, 1.5. Yeah, it's not bad. A little brighter overall. I'm going to desaturate even more, 0.5. Yeah, some lighter white sand. The contrast, I'm going to put back to default. I don't want those darker spots that we're getting. So it's looking okay. Now, I think we actually, I guess, driving the roughness is going to be really important here. And what is reflective? But let's just try cranking up. I'm going to have to type numbers. If I try and drag, then Redshift is like, update, 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 like every single tick, which isn't going to do anybody any good. It did go eventually. So let's just see what that does. And then we don't have any bump or anything yet, so I don't expect this to look good. It's probably just going to look like a flat, shiny sand material. Honestly, I thought it would look worse, but it is a flat, shiny sand material. So, two things. Actually, yeah, before we even get to bump, let's try controlling our roughness. The roughness is going to be really important here. So I'm going to say 100% roughness, and then make a ramp. And this ramp is going to ingest. It's weird that it is triggering a big refresh when this ramp isn't even plugged into anything. Let's plug that in input. I think it's alt input. Right? Alt input is where that material is supposed to go. So now if I output this as our surface, it should give us essentially black and white sand with no shading. Yeah, perfect. So, I'm not sure if I mean, that could be fine. Essentially, I'm just going to try and feed that into the roughness of the reflection. And it's going to make certain parts really shiny, and it's going to make certain parts really rough. So essentially, it could kind of give you the sparkles from the sand. There's other settings in Redshift that might be able to get us there, like different sheens and different, I know there's like a car speckle shader, which maybe could go a long way here. But anyway, this should make certain parts rough and certain parts shiny. And right now it's going the whole gambit, where in reality, we probably want it to we'd want to heavily influence it, where it's like some will be brighter, some will be darker, or maybe it shouldn't get to black and it should be some dark gray. And I always forget if, well, white is 100% and it's 100% rough. So white equals rough. So yeah, keep that in mind. But you know, potentially some remapping would be a really good idea there. And then we've got the same ramp. So you know what? I'll just feed that same thing into the bump. So let's get our bump map. Come on. Yeah, I wish it didn't hiccup on the initial creation of it. So that's going to turn that into a bump map. We output that as a bump. We'll just see how that looks. Would it's going to keep on hiccuping, but would turning these rocks off temporarily actually speed us up here? Maybe. Okay, so now we can see the bump. The bump is going to be very strong because out of the gate, a bump is worth a height of 1. Meanwhile, how tall is a grain of sand? Like ridiculously tiny. So I'm immediately going to drop it to 0.02, which is still probably too much, but yeah, that definitely gives us some texture on there. And honestly, well, it's going to slow down the render, but I don't think the overall render time is the thing. It's the initializing that's kind of killing us here. Would be actually, there's kind of 2 places I want to put this. So color correct, ramp. Well, let me show you what I'm thinking. If I zoom significantly out, and let's go to a sandier area. So I think the sand's going to look pretty good from a distance. Maybe the bump's a little strong. Maybe the reflection, like I said, maybe that reflection should not represent, it can go to full sparkles, but, and there's not too much color variation. Honestly, it starts going away quite a bit there, but let's bring back the gamma. Yeah, a little more texture there. Anyway, a thought I have is overlaying, I feel like we're seeing a little bit of the tiling of the texture. So it might be a tiling material, but there's definitely a little bit of a tension that in any individual little section is calling. If you look really closely, I'm mostly just not going to worry about that. But what I do want to show is save it, show that we can layer up a single noise. So let's output that and let's make a noise. And temporarily, let's just see what that noise is doing for us. I'm going to grab Naki. And, well, actually, that's a pretty good tiny Naki, but I'm more thinking that this one's going to be a large one. So let's jump it up to 11. Honestly, even like 55. Yeah, something like this. So you see I've got this large breakup pattern, essentially what is essentially what I'm going for. So I'll feed that in as our next color. And let's drag in for this color. And that is now normal, so it's completely overriding it. I'm going to say it is going to overlay, but it's only overlaying like, I don't know, 0.25. Let's output our final material. And now the overlay is weak, but what we should be seeing is you see we get darker area here and a lighter area here. Let's try 0.5. Actually, I'm going to put it up to 1 just to go all the way. And now you can see, do you see how we're getting this large breakup pattern? And that breakup pattern calls a little bit more attention to itself than other things do. So it helps hide repetition. So if I go back to, I don't know, 0.45, like we want to make it subtle enough where it's kind of hard to tell where it's at. We could do a lot of things like changing the noise type, change the scale of the noise. But yeah, those types of breakup patterns can go a long way. I'm going to change it to Luca. Yeah, see, Luca does call a lot of attention to itself, but it does break up the pattern really well. So maybe we just make that way weaker, 0.2. Yeah, slightly lighter. We're getting more into the range, I'm thinking. Some of the area, it starts getting hard to see the noise, but it's definitely still there. Even something like 0.1 like will help break up the pattern to the point where it's like I can't see the noise anymore, but it's definitely doing something. And if I look for if I really look, I can see like a light area and darker areas and whatnot. Now the sand, I think it is definitely pulling out a little too shiny. I made 2 ramps here, so I should probably duplicate one, and then this one. Actually, I think, let me try that again. If you hold down Control, Shift. No, I thought I copied the wires if I did that correctly. Nope. Oh, okay. If you hold down Shift, it copies the wires. Control and Shift. Okay. So I copied the wire. That's all I was trying to get from there. Okay, so this one is going to, yeah, this one will be the bump. So we don't interfere with the bump as I manipulate the ramp. We want more rough areas, so we only get occasional sparkles. So I think if I drag this way over, yeah, okay, so I was right. Anyway, the you can see that the sparkles have mostly gone away. Let's pull this in so that there is a chance for more, like, occasional ones. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. See, we're getting these very occasional pings of highlight. That, yeah, that's what I'm looking for from at least what I'm going for with the sand here. Now, we could make the whole thing shinier. We can make the whole thing darker, but that's pretty much what I was going for. And, you know, potentially we could take this and say, well, you're not completely dull. So I'll pull everything back. Everything gets a little bit of shine. Actually, even that was too much. Just a little bit. Everything gets a little bit of shine, but then we got a couple of highlights that will actually, like, poke out and call attention to themselves. And, you know, we could just keep layering and layering, but definitely I probably would be inclined to put a noise to also combine with this ramp, potentially even completely separately, where it's like, instead of using this ramp of the noise, especially with the tiling that we're getting from it, you know, potentially we could just be like, well, just make that a noise. And honestly, layering up a couple of noises could probably make you some sand completely from scratch, but basing something off of an image can go a really, really long way to getting you, like, a lot of your detail. You just use noises to augment it. Yeah, now we did not end up finding a nice stone material, unfortunately. But the sand's looking okay. And then we've got our small rocks. And then we've got our big old boulders. And that should automatically make the secondary layer of sand update and push up a little bit as soon as it exists. It might not have refreshed on it. And then I definitely think these rocks are getting... there's some sort of gamma issue. But I'm not an expert on that. I don't want to spend a bunch of time fiddling. We have spent a lion's share of the episode tinkering around here, like trying to make some landscape stuff. Scott, are you happy with some of the stuff we were talking about here? Yep, looks like. But I would like to sneak in at least one more question. Oh, I see the wireframe. This is going back a long way, but YouTube was compressing the wireframe in really ugly ways. So, you know, I'm glad I turned it off, but thanks for the heads up. Paul had a suggestion that we could have put a rocket in here somewhere and, like, been making that the focal point of the scene. That would have been cool. Let's see. Fitim, you can't post links in YouTube. You have to go on to Twitch to be able to post links. YouTube just simply does not allow them, which is, you know, depending on your audience, is going to be a good thing. Okay, actually, Demi, I don't know if this was related to this, but Demi is asking about the ability of, let's say that we wanted... Well, maybe, you know, we could say desert plants or something, where it's like, oh, I want there to be more or less of them in a particular area for a particular reason. So what maybe would be some approaches to copying that? So I consider this a different question. And honestly, I'm trying to think of the way I would tackle the idea of density. I can think of a... there might be a Voronoi fracture trick. But it comes to, like, inside of this cloner, like, yeah, we've got the selection tag, so we could limit things based on that selection. And maybe that would be a way to go. But it's based on the surface, and that would erase things out. Let's turn off the boulders for a moment. So let's just see if we can randomize, like, the placement of these. In fact, we could even turn off the sand. See, you can see that we've got it's random, but a very uniform distribution here. And let's say via something, we want to have there be more or less. So well, the first thought is, let's save this as the next version. Let's say, Oh, the first thing I want to find out is, can we feed in a vertex map? So on these rocks, I will add on another vertex map, and let's just see if this even allows for vertex map. Now it says vertex map, but I imagine it's kind of binary. But let's see if it's capable of doing anything. And we can do that super easy by making a spherical field. And spherical field, you will be quite large and up in the air, so it actually does something. Okay. You can see here that that didn't seem to do anything. Doesn't care about that. But maybe we could still use this vertex map as inspiration. So here's now my thought. Let's say that there's a random field, and we'll go with a chaotic one like Luca. Make it 1,000. I'll go to a point where we see a bit of coherence. Yeah, there's a. Actually, I want to see even more. So let's say times 10. Okay, so now we got light areas, we got dark areas, and then I'm going to overlay that. Let's say dot Luca. Let's do another one. So I'm going to duplicate the Luca and feed in the second one. And let's just say that this one is, I think we need to say Perlin. So we'll make a Perlin noise. The Perlin noise will be teeny tiny. Back to default, so really tiny dots. So I'm going to say, okay, those two are overlaying each other here. Or I will say overlay. So now you can see that we end up with, in general, like dark areas and then light areas, but you also have this alternating like light and dark, light and dark. So then can we add a tag that the cloner will respect? And I'm thinking we just make a simple polygon selection tag. So this polygon selection tag, we can show it. Let's just make a material, and I'll make said material bright yellow. Drop this on, and I'll say, okay, material. Hopefully, I turned off materials. Turn them back on again. Luckily, I remembered. It's going to take a second to refresh. Okay, so now you can see we get this crazy yellow material. I'm going to say, hey, you are limited to polygon selection, which right now you see is nothing. So inside the field of our polygon selection, I'm going to say vertex map. So now that should, now you see, based on the noise I just made, it is either selecting or not selecting. And because of that little Perlin noise, we can get like these little speckles going. So you can get some randomness on top of it. So here's a large area of Luca, and here's large empty areas of Luca, translated from a vertex map to a selection tag. And now that we have a selection tag, and I'll pull that material off for a moment because we don't need to see that, can the rocks respect this vertex map for the polygon selection? They all disappeared. That's not great. Let's try. I'm going to move the rocks afterward. Sometimes there's a calculation issue. I don't think that would be the case here. And I'm going to try dragging the selection. Sometimes you can drag that directly into the object. That's still not seeing it. A little dangerous, but I'm going to click on instance instead. That is continuing not to see it. I'm getting the feeling this might be one of those that needs to be made editable circumstances. We're in the new file, so I will just make that editable. Everything should propagate through the system. We've got our vertex map, and yep, the instant we did that, I think, yep, now you can see that that is respecting it. That's we're getting clusters of rocks in certain places and not in others. So right there, that's a method for doing it. Having said that, let's double check a thing or two. Let's go back to render instances, which, okay, at least, well, let's let it refresh. Render instances seems to still respect it, so good. Let's try dragging in. You can't put a vertex map directly here, but what if we put it there and then go back to the original object? Does it respect that at all? I doubt it. Yeah, see, they all came back again. But now that we did make it editable, can we put this into the selection? Yeah, it does respect it. So it just it needed to be made editable. Possibly we could have put it in a connect object. There's a decent chance that would have worked, but yeah, you can see now that those are based on those selections. We can always go back to I did put this vertex map here because it's a really easy way of visualizing, I think, the layout. So we did, when it comes to the polygon selection, it's either on or off. So visually, we should keep in mind, let's put a quantize here and drop that down to 1. So this is what it's actually seeing, is like it's on or it's off. And that is what our selection tag looks like. So keep that in mind. But going back into our Perlin or our Luca, we could change the distribution. We could, let's see, if I grab this Perlin noise and we go into the remapping and we say, give me a curve, we can really crank up the contrast here. Actually, let me turn off the cloner. So if we crank up the contrast, yeah, now you can see that that Perlin noise is like having a major effect on this overlay. Yeah, this overlay is really powerful now because it's really high contrast Perlin noise. But then we could start pulling back on it, and I can see we get, we get pure areas of them, we get less areas, but now we randomly are distributing like where it's supposed to be or not. Honestly, we don't even need the second Perlin noise. We could just base it off this, and you see here's Lucas saying where they should go. Having said that, we've got other options. This is pretty high poly, but let's risk it. I'm going to drop in the rocks themselves and say, let's base this off the curvature of the rocks. And if we increase this, you can actually get some pretty cool effects. So here's our reference radius, and you see that we get these kind of pits and melty areas, which is pretty cool looking. Like, I think you could probably, I'm not even sure what I'd want to do with it, but it's a really cool effect. Like, look how it's finding crevices. Which is pretty neat, kind of alien looking. So, this is still just a vertex map, meaning if we go back to our polygon selection, or let's move our quantize above it, this is what the actual output is. Always, good idea to put the quantize in because it's actually showing you what the effect is. We could increase the contrast in such a way that we'll see more of that. I'm kind of fascinated by this. We haven't done too much with convex. What happens if we move the radius up to like 500? Everything gets slower if we do, but yeah, this actually, unlike the redshift one, as I increase this radius, actually feels like it's doing something. I don't know what increasing curvature means, so I'll turn it on. Interesting. We can switch over to concave, and that should give us the opposite. This is like where all the little pits are, which is really, really, really useful information you can have when you're playing with this type of thing. We can weaken those. You see we get these little lovely crevices. So essentially now what we're saying is let's make this a little bit higher contrast. Put the quantize after. Now you can see these are the areas. Now we're like, these are all the little pits. These are all the little areas that, sink down relative to the area around them. So that is now translating to the selection, which means I can say I want rocks only to appear where there's little crevices. Now keep in mind that there is a lot of little crevices happening everywhere. And these rocks are only going to appear where they already were going to. So it's not like suddenly 2,000 rocks are appearing only in crevices. It's more like we clone 2,000 rocks everywhere, and only the ones that are in a crevice get to remain. But in general, you see these big open flat areas are not getting stones, and these tiny areas that have more going on are getting stones. I think smaller areas with more tiny stones. These stones, just for our purposes here, these stones are a little bit slow. So I'm going to just make some cubes. Let's make some tiny cubes. 5 by 5 by 5. 15 by 15 by 15. Okay, so we got some cubes now, which makes it a little safer to be like, okay, well, give me 20,000 of them. And now, yeah, now we see them appearing. Again, these very flat areas. We're not really seeing them too much. Temporarily turn that off. Let's go back into our vertex map. So here's where they're going, but we could start really limiting this. Well, first of all, I made the radius larger. If we make it smaller, the contrast will go down. There's fewer places for it to go. Something I am kind of curious about, though, is like, what if I keep on increasing this? So, okay, well, that goes really, really big. I kind of wanted it to blur. Actually, no, that's maybe, okay, this type of stuff gets really dangerous for me. So my thought is, like, we're still quantizing. Always keep that in mind. So this is what we're seeing here, but I only want it to appear in very particular areas, like only like the deepest crevices should it be. And when you turn this on, you see that we're still getting like a lot of little ones. So super dangerous, but I'm going to duplicate my vertex map, and I'm going to delete everything out except for the quantize. We'll still need that. And now rename this to vertex map 2. Vertex map 1 will get fed in the vertex map 2. So now we're just simply feeding in the result of the other one, which means we get this really high contrast vertex map. I'm going to be like, awesome. Now average it, start blurring it. So as I blur it, you can see that areas that had a had a high density where there's a lot of little crevices, are giving us, generally speaking, lighter areas. So I can go into a spline or a curve and say, okay, like they get pretty faded out. So I'm going to increase, I can pull up my contrast here. So you see they start getting lighter, and we keep on going even further until we start getting something pretty bright. So yeah, those became reasonably bright areas. So if I were to grab my quantize now and drop this, oh, that's weird. It's not letting me drag my quantize. Fine. Actually, it's not letting me delete the quantize. All right, well, I'm just going to pretend that didn't happen and make a new one. Drop this down to 1. And now you'll see that we've now, via blurring, gotten just some areas, some very specific areas of extra detail. Now, if we grab our curve, I could push this even further. Let's still make them brighter. It's going to be a little bit larger. So now you can see, okay, those are now, in general, the areas where there was a lot going on. It was a lot brighter. So we can go here, back to the original map, and you see, like, yeah, there definitely is a lot more going on there. But now all these tiny ones that are kind of isolated by themselves, those, when they blurred a lot, didn't have enough bright neighbors, and now they just don't show up anymore, which is pretty cool, which now means we can go into this one and be like, okay, well, here's these bright areas. So, and we can turn off the quantize temporarily. So you can see these are the bright areas. And I'm going to say, okay, bring in that vertex map again. And now you see it here. I'll say multiply. So now we're only getting those in the bright areas, and all the ones that were kind of by themselves and isolated, they're starting to get ignored. If I turn on the quantize now, you're going to see that we're left with only these being valid areas to put rocks. Like these really rocky areas, those are now allowed to get rocks. In our vertex map, or in our selection map, I'll replace it with vertex map 2, which should update our selection. And now if we turn on our rocks, we should get a ton of them, and they are only allowed in the really rocky areas. And that, I think, looks pretty cool. Vertex maps are like amazing. That we're able to do these types of things and like extract the curvature and then get all these extra details here. Like that, I don't know, I just love the way that that looks. Now we do have a lot of clones. I'm trying to rotate my camera, and it is, it's not frozen, but man, it's not quick. But keep in mind that this was a very heavily subdivided piece of geometry here. Just to maybe finish the idea, or it's like, okay, well, let's say that I wanted these actually to be plants. I guess I'll save that because it's working pretty well. But let's say I wanted them to be plants. I'll go into my cloner rocks. It's already doing a lot of randomizing. I think, yeah, these rocks are already getting all these different things applied. I guess in this case, I don't want the formula to be flipping it upside down, and we don't want the non-uniform, but this is now spinning it and scaling it, which are things that I want. So I'll say, hey, don't align the clone. So now they'll all just be sitting vertically and then spinning and tilting a little bit. So yeah, they all just tilt a little. And then I'll say, don't be a cube. Let's go find a lovely desert plant. Model, I'll say grass. There's a couple of dead types of grass in here, if I recall. I thought there was a tall, slightly more dead one, but that's fine. We got these little desert ones, and then we got some individual strands. What's one I like the look of? We're spinning around a lot, so I'm just going to grab this one. It might be a little too fancy for what I want. And we could obviously grab several. And I don't think that these are redshift, but they actually render pretty well in redshift from what I remember. So they're probably pretty small, but I think they get scaled up. So let's just drop it in and see what happens. Okay, yeah, they're there. They seem to be tilted. Oh, I don't rotate, so let's turn off that 90. So now they should. Okay, now they are standing vertically. And they're pretty small, and we probably need a lot more of them. And I mean, like I said, the slightly unfortunate thing is that, well, I kind of want to do a speed test. Right now, we're running at 0.7, and that is probably because we are trying to create 20,000 blades of grass and then be like, wait, but don't show them into these particular spots. So purely as an experiment, let's turn that off so we're not cloning. And now we've got these lovely rocks, and it's got now a selection tag that is saying only these areas, only these selections are valid. So what if we, I haven't done this in a while. Let's see what happens. I'm going to search for a delete. And let's try and do a procedural delete. And that deletes everything, which makes sense. So now I'm going to say, well, don't delete everything. Just delete, and we can delete this and drag in our selection tag. And now, I think, if it is working, it's going to be deleting only those polygons, maybe. Still, actually, this is still pretty dang slow. Well, first of all, it's huge, but this is pretty slow even without the, oh, it's going to be those vertex maps. Those vertex maps are probably doing like massive amounts of calculation. Oh, and this is probably creating a feedback loop. So this is a horrible idea, but if I were to duplicate the rocks a second time, this one doesn't need any of this info. So these rocks, we're just not going to mess with them. They're just there. So now we've got a second set of rocks. And you know what, for what we're doing, we don't need the sand. Let's just simplify the scene. Okay. Oh, those other ones were doing all the deformation. I guess we do need that. Okay, so that's back. Okay, so can I grab that delete again and say after, because this one's now unrelated. So I'm going to say after you've deformed, delete, but not everything. Delete based on the selection map. And it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter that's on a different object because it's got the same indexes. But, well, that's not showing up the way I expect it to. I'm going to unhide the original, drop this material on, which still has a polygon selection. Interesting. That's not what I expected. Vertex map 2. It is successfully cloning on there. So limit your selection there. I don't like that it's flashing on and off, which is, I don't think it's implying a feedback loop. That one's off, but this is not the accurate vertex map. Our vertex map looks like this. And that is then getting fed into this tag. I'll move it over, but I don't think that order matters. This is not that. I'm going to just say translate the index. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's weird. So that is kind of the right pattern, but that's clearly not the right spot. But the clones were appearing in the right area. I'm getting real confused. Also, like the fact that they're blinking on and off, I don't like that either. Now, we did have that quantize that was not deletable, like that type of weirdness. Like, I don't I don't like all the stacks of unusual behavior we're getting. But we do have some selections that in theory should be doing what I want. So the idea is supposed to be that this is going to be deleting some of that polygon selection. I know it's on the other object, but it should be deleting it. And in theory, what we should be able to say is, even now it's lagging a bit. I'm going to move back and we're going to say I want all minus the polygon selection, which should mean it deletes everything except for the selection. But the way the selection is being a little bit weird on us, I'm not surprised that that's being weird. Now I should be able to drag the tag over. Okay, I just dragged the tag from one object to the other, and it's still referencing the vertex maps, which is fine. And that did trigger it, but I gotta say that these polygons are still not in the right spot. Sort of just ignoring that, I'm going to hide our copy, which is now deleting everything except for the final polygons. I'm going to say, okay, cloner, you're cloning not onto the original rocks, but you'll be cloning on the rocks too. And I'm going to say that you only have to clone 2,000 instead of all of them. And now, when we activate, oh, and now we don't have to worry about the polygon selection because literally only those polygons exist. So every single clone is a valid clone. So I don't know, possibly, well, you see it is grabbing those incorrect polygons. I'm a little lost as to why those are the polygons it's selecting. We got some general weirdness going on, but the process did work. We're just getting the wrong selection. But you see the idea. The entire point of that was now we're not cloning a whole bunch of redundant ones. We're only cloning relevant ones, like directly onto the relevant polygons. But clearly, clearly we click on here. Those are not matching matching this. It's like the entire thing got like moved or offset or something. And I'm not quite sure why. Because the vertex maps are correctly showing the results. The cleaned up results, which I think those look great. Just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to close the file and then reopen it. That quantize not being allowed to be deleted, I mean, there shouldn't be a reason. Even though we just worked on it, it's giving me that yelling about redshift thing. Never quite sure about that. Okay, so yeah, well, I guess you'd expect it to have to refresh, but let's at least see if the vertex map allows me to delete the quantize, which now it does. So closing and opening, at least that did something. Distance fall off, use the form points, constant update. All that seems fine. I wonder if constant update, that's something we would want for it wouldn't be detecting changes, but I wonder if we turn off constant update, if that would like significantly speed us up. That doesn't reference anything. But yeah, so if we go back here, we get this, and now that's cached. Is it quicker? You know, it's hard to tell. I'm gonna sneeze again. Excuse me. Anyway, I guess hide that rock. See if this, yeah, it's still not the right vertex map. Let's just try deleting that vertex map. Drag it in again. Yeah, look at this. That is not the right selection. This is set to nearest. So it's like, well, I don't want the nearest. Like, give me the literal index, because that's what we care about. And then this does this offset one. It needs to form points, yeah, because it has to see them post deformation. Yeah, I'm not sure about that detail. The concept is all there, and I mean, there's that one step earlier where we had all the rocks cloning into the corner pretty much perfectly, but I was trying to push it a little bit harder with this experiment. I don't know. Let me check the chat, see if there's any little follow questions we can answer. C, D, E. Yeah, we're not starting a pyro question here. I haven't tried to do anything with smoke rings. I'd probably fake it significantly. Yeah, we had more questions. Vertex maps confuse the hell out of me for the longest time. Oh yeah, they're so powerful, but yeah, right now they're obviously causing us trouble. And there's a level that, you know, is dangerous to be doing these tests on so many polygons, just because everything. If I was working on a project, I would isolate this down to like 500 polygons so I could be iterating quicker, because every time I click anything, it's having to lag and calculate and do all these different things. So, you know, you could save yourself a lot of time by simplifying. Like, always simplify your rig if things don't seem to be behaving. I mean, honestly, I'm still, let me check some chat, but can't use fields directly in tags now. Yeah, Brees, welcome. Brees, you are correct that we could be bypassing the vertex map. I was planning on doing a lot of what we just did with the vertex map, where I was getting like these, I was taking vertex maps and blurring them and translating them. If you do it in the selection tag, it's going to be a lot harder to visualize, but we are probably getting a lot of slowdown because of that. But I did at least have a reason for it. Just to save us more time, if we bake this down, so I'm just going to say connect and delete. Now we're just left with our lovely vertex maps, finding the gaps, and now it's not doing all that deformation. And honestly, if we were trying to like test or prototype, I would just make it, even right now, is it just the fact we've got, I guess it's still those vertex maps. So I'm going to just make a very rough selection of our relevant area, and then grow. More. Grow. That should be enough for our test. Grow. and then UI invert delete, and now it's going to be like, look how much quicker it is just because there's less going on. Oops. Wait, my mouse. Okay, sorry. Okay. So, original map, modified map. Obviously not as dramatic of a change on this one. But if I want to carry on, I'd make a duplicate. This one doesn't need any of that info. Let's add a new other selection. Selection uses fields. Fields will reference this vertex map. That vertex map wants to look at the index, and yeah, so that's now translating onto here. That should be a selection. If we copy this tag, we should see, hopefully, the material applied to polygon selection. Is it still? Let's put it here. All right. Put it here and say view. And that's correct. You see that is working fine. But now if I move it to this other object, it seems fine. That's weird. Why wasn't it fine before? Well, it didn't solve the problem, but now if it is going over there, let's see if we can actually do the delete trick. Search for delete. I want to delete. It's going to delete everything again. Don't delete everything. Instead, select all minus the selection tag. Okay, correct again. So I don't think I did anything different, but yeah, I don't know. Are we hitting some sort of weird internal point cap or something? Clone onto the rocks, 2000, limit the, we don't need to limit the selection, so even that should be quicker to calculate. Enable, and now we get all these lovely we get all these lovely plants cloning, and we're within thresholds in which it can be running in crazy real time. But of course, vertex maps, you see all the power we're getting, but it's also like incredible amounts of slowdown from them. So I'm not quite sure what to say about that. But I can now hide the copy, make the clones, and now you see we get lovely plants growing only where there is like deep crevices. But what's great, it's not just noise-based crevices. These are crevices that are relative to the area around them, which is what the curvature is giving us. So that's really cool when you have like this type of implied, what's the right word? Like, I don't know. These are not randomly placed. They do not feel randomly placed. There's some intelligence behind that. And keep in mind that we have additional things that we could take these and deform them a little bit, or like put in additional modifiers so that it's like, oh, they generally follow the landscape, but not everywhere. So there's a lot of options for that type of thing. And modifying this original vertex map. Honestly, I kind of, with how twitchy everything's being, I kind of doubt it. But let's try. Oh, is that still? It's still being bugged. So that even this vertex map, yeah, I don't like this. You see, trying to select this curve, it's not giving me the interface. So there's just a bug happening there. And it's a vertex map fed into a vertex map, but I don't think that this should be happening. Actually, yeah, you see here, interestingly, with the quantize, here's why I was putting the quantize, because that visually shows us it. If I turn this off, it's like, oh, maybe it'll clone onto here, but that is less than 50% brightness. So the selection tag wouldn't see it. So by putting the quantize here, it's visually showing us that, yes, indeed, that never was going to happen, because, it's the same math. But yeah, I really, really like this curvature stuff. This would have made for a good example back when it first came out. I don't think I had any like great examples of it, but being able to pull out those details. If only this calculation happens a little quicker. Obviously, we're feeding in 400, wasn't it 400 times 400, which is a lot of polygons, and then trying to do a very large, this curvature, this concave curvature at 100. Like, how many polygons is that finding and having to calculate for every single point? Like, we're asking a lot of it. Now, having said that, maybe something that would have been smart is I could have said, don't use fields anymore. And that information, whatever its last state, would still be there. It's like, oh, well, I'm just a painted vertex map. I'm not constantly refreshing and updating. So right there, that might have been really smart. And even here, now that we've done all these calculations, they say, well, don't use fields now. So now that's essentially baked down. Now we can always turn it back on again and update things, but now those are just as if I painted them manually. And then we go back over here, and this would be feeding through even quicker. Although this is now well, actually, this polygon selection, because we made it editable, I think if we turn off fields here, that selection also is going to be remembered. If I unhide this and double click, yeah, that selection I just made is still that selection. So we're actually able to do that all the way through the process, and it'll probably speed everything up. But yeah, pretty, the concepts are here. And spending more time and layering up some of those ideas, and like I said, you spend a couple hours and you start really getting into making rigs and making things behave the way you want to. You can actually start making some really nice layouts, and even here being procedural. If we had been able to do mega scans and like place some things manually, sneak in some extra bits here or there, definitely adding in a couple extra plants here. If you haven't played with the cinema grasses, I really like these. Like we dragged in this one, but we can drag that one and this one. And that one. Oh yeah, these grasses look really nice. So let's say load those. Why did I only load 2? Oh, I must have misclicked. No. Oh no, they are there. Sorry. Drop these in as well, and then you suddenly start getting a bunch of variety here. Actually, Baron. Did I scale those up? It seems really big. Oh, I guess the wild grasses and the biome ones are a little different. So let's make those bigger. Yep. Runs pretty quick. Oh, I'm scanning a polygon, which is not a good idea. Their object, now we fill those in. So yeah, adding a couple different plants, like man, the variety here just really hides the fact we're cloning, and we're rotating, and we're slightly scaling everything, and we're slightly tilting all of them. So yeah, this spin, this little bit of tilt, like really, really does a good job of hiding all of the uniformity. These shouldn't probably be scaling quite that much from each other. Yeah, it looks a little better. So cool. Honestly, I think the reality would probably be the opposite. Like, plants wouldn't grow in these. Well, I guess it depends. If there's a lot of water runoff, they'd get washed away. So maybe they'd survive on these other parts. And in theory, actually, yeah, because of the way I'm doing these rocks, I could just say delete the polygon selection, and now they appear everywhere but there. And we can go back to the original map and remap them differently. Although our inability to, curve allows me to click on it this time. But if I crank up this brightness, well, I guess more come in. We got our original vertex map, which we're averaging, and this one, nearest. I want to essentially expand this. If I say average, and it multiplies, turn off the quantize. Yeah, so if I average that more and then put another, or even move the curve up, brighten these more. Yeah, you see now I have a much larger area. So very quickly I'm able to modify these controls. We do this, and now we're saying, okay, well, let's also say that the selection update, and now you can see that the plants are only growing where erosion is not happening. So pretty easy right there. Or go back into our selection map or not selection map, delete, and we'll say all minus that. And now they only grow where there is erosion, but in a much wider field. So the ability to create a curvature, blur it out, and then bring the contrast back up again gives you so much power to to dynamically place these things exactly where you want to. Super duper dig it. And even, I mean, I could just keep going and going because I really love these types of concepts. If we turn off this quantize, you can see this is where they're kind of multiplying up and down. But I could say, well, let's create a random noise here. And I'll try an overlay. And the overlay, how big do we want the noise to be? I think we need really high contrast noise. So let's go and curve it. Crank that contrast up. Okay, so now we're starting to see the noise up here. That's an overlay. Let's just say normal for a second. So this is what the noise is doing. So our polygon resolution isn't crazy high, but now you can see that we're creating all these little extra random spots. So if I say overlay or multiply, we're modifying the way they look on these edges. especially if I say multiply. Oh, it's overlay. If I say multiply, they're probably even darker. I guess overlay is fine in that case. Oh, I set the wrong thing to multiply. That makes sense. Okay, so now I set that to multiply. There we go. So now you can see that, you know, it is placing the plants where there is erosion, but now like it's putting little gaps in there, so there's fewer of them, and that filters down to this actual selection, which makes more plant. You know, we've always got the exact number of plants we want everywhere here. Anyway, like the ability to layer and layer and layer all these things together. You know, if we did the right combinations here, we could get some time lapse, like some simulated time lapse type stuff going. But yeah, super fun. I love playing with vertex maps and stuff like this. And honestly, I had never thought in the past about turning off the fields. So it's like, oh, you can do your initial calculation, but there's no, if it's not updating anymore, then we don't need to use fields anymore. We can use the baked down version, and that might significantly speed it up, where it's like those vertex maps aren't doing curvatures and blurs anymore. So like as we rotate, that might make a huge difference. Any final questions? We're already a little over. We'll get to more questions next week. I know that there were some good questions, Brees, I want to be able to get to your question. So if you're here next week, I'll keep an eye out for you and try and answer it first if you're here. Which maybe your name is different on YouTube. But anyway, just call it out and I'll keep an eye out for it. I like being able to tackle questions from new people. Oh yeah, Demi was asking about the Voronoi fracture version of density scattering, which I mentioned. Is there a short version of that? And do I even know what I'm talking about? Because was I being... Was I being a little short-sighted with the scattering with a Voronoi fracture? Because we need areas of higher and lesser density. I guess you could do that with a shader, though, can't you? Let's find out. Simple. Well, new file, keep it simple. Plain, no subdivisions. Feed this into a Voronoi fracture. And I think we want to fracture it like a lot. Oh, so we add a shader source, which we almost never ever talk about these things. So shader source, I'm going to say giving 1,000 points, and then we feed it a noise, and it looks very evenly distributed. But if we start cranking up our scale, that doesn't seem to help much. Let's try Luca. No, that is super duper uniform. But, oh, sample precision. That's super important. Let's go 10 times higher. Oh, I guess 150 is as high as we can go. Okay, now this is dangerous. If there's a limit that low, then we got to be careful here. As I crank this up, I don't know what sample precision means relative to anything, but you'll see as I increase this amount, it is sampling the noise more often, and now you see based purely on this noise, we are getting more or fewer dots in different areas. And I went to a Luca. That should probably be like way bigger. It's probably pretty random. If I start making it larger, you're going to start to see a little uniformity here. Yeah, so now you can see areas of high density and areas of low density based on what the noise is doing. I'm trying to remember the context in which that matters. It might be areas where they shift from going lighter and darker, darker to lighter. So if we do like a lot of octaves, yeah, I'm honestly not sure how the shader stuff works there. But if, let's say that we're doing this instead on a landscape object. So we fractured this, and it's, in theory, still, oh, that's, I want it to be on the surface only. Oh, is it? I only want it to be on the surface. Oh, sample method volume. Surface only. Okay, better. And potentially, let's make this a 2D noise. That might be quicker to calculate. Yeah, okay, same difference. Okay, so now you see that we do have areas of different density, and I think like doing things like cranking up some of this contrast and whatnot, like there's a good chance that this will make larger areas. We could potentially merge them together. But anyway, you can see that we get a heavier density in some spots, lower density in other ones, and each of these is now essentially a spot that we can clone onto. So keeping it simple, let's just snag these dandelions. And cloner. Clone, multi-instance clone onto an object. The object will be the Voronoi fracture. I want to view the Voronoi fracture as a axis. So now we're seeing the center point of every one of our Voronoi fractures as a point in which to clone. You know, we'd want that to probably be an instance. We can hide the original object, and now we've got areas of greater density and lesser density by sampling a noise to put points in particular areas. Now, I mean, whenever it's a little brute force, and we do get higher density and lower density. Not exactly the way I'd necessarily want to do that. I don't like, as you probably noticed in the earlier stuff, I don't like brute forcing things. We're here, like, we're making a massive amount of Voronoi fractures, like, which is doing a lot of calculations. Like, I wish that there was a way that we could be sampling. Well, it's almost like the surface, we're randomly placing on the surface, but if the surface had like a sample methodology that could actually be viewing a noise somehow, like that would be pretty cool. But the only thing we can do to vary that is the selection tag. And that puts us right back down the other path we were on. Now, you know, even that would give us some possibilities, but that was a little bit of a different methodology. So I'll save that just for anybody who's interested. So I know we shifted to several topics within the landscape. Clone via fracture. There's like one giant topic, but we broke it out into like 4 different discrete questions, I think. Yeah, actually, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Real Ruckley, cool name, is mentioning the hair module. And if we treat the hair module as a series of splines, I mean, we're already here. I'm already going over. So let's just see what happens. That's a good idea. Simulate hair, add hair. So we've got tons and tons of hairs. Growth, normal, I'll just say based on the direction will be Y. They go straight up. For our own visual, we only needed to have 1 segment, and let's do a length of 10, so we get all these tiny little ones. So now we're getting 1 per polygon vertex. I'm going to say, based on the polygon area, please. So now, in theory, and we might need to say editing regrow, and now you can see that they're randomly placed everywhere. So we've got, you know, pure random distribution on the area. So essentially, this is behaving a lot like the surface in the surface that the cloner does. Now, if we go to this density map and we drop in a noise, I've never been, this seems to be very, very similar to the thing we were just doing. Let's do 1,000 and crank up our contrast. So, okay, we can clearly see that should be doing something. I gotta say, I'm not seeing it do anything here. Maybe it doesn't affect guides, or maybe we have to regrow. Okay, you have to regrow. So actually what's good there is that it seems to be a one-time thing. It's not constantly checking. Although, what if you wanted it to animate? I would think that would have to, there's an auto update. Yeah, I'm not super sure about that. Anyway, we can now see that we've got those in a more limited area. Let's do a different noise. I just want to see if they update. Luca doesn't update, but if I go back to the hair and click on regrow, now we do get a new noise and a new distribution. Now here's how many levels it's checking. So I think if we crank it up or down, it'll make more or less, but now we can see that we're getting these nice empty areas and full areas. And if I say hairs, return, let's see, growth, no, roots as guides. Now it's making exactly as many hairs as there are guides. Hairs are what's real. And now we say generate, don't generate hairs, instead generate a single spline. The spline is returning a single object. It's one spline with a bunch of segments, and we just said that there should only be 1 point per. So I think there'll be no subdivisions here. So this becomes a simple spline object. And now we've got our cloner dandelion. I'm going to pull that out temporarily, and let's say we are cloning onto an object. The object will be here. The reason I didn't drop it in is the count is set to 10. I'm going to say the count is set to 1, and now it's only making 1 per, which, you know, I just didn't want to go too crazy. Now we clone this onto that, and now, whoa, okay, it seems like there's a lot going on here. Okay, they're all rotated, not necessarily surprising. I guess we just have a lot going on. There's a lot. So this is, I guess the hair is like a one-time thing because you manually click to check. So there could be an improvement in regards to that. Minus 90. Okay, now they're aiming up. And we have all our options to like spin and rotate, etc. But now you see I was able to make like a lot. There should be actually a very precise number, which under guides is 10,000. So we've got 10,000 of these things. If we drop it down to 1,000 and regrow, yeah. Does every regrow? Okay, I thought, okay, it's static. So anyway, we regrow, and now we've got a very reasonable amount. And yeah, worked pretty well. And we're cloning onto it, so that still gives you all the options where we could grab like a second plant. Let's just grab one of those. So yeah, it's going to alternate those. Yeah, so that's a nice alternative. I like that idea. Copying those in. You could make more per hair, but I think this is the cleanest, this is the simplest, least calculations that the hair is going to have to do is a single segment based on the polygon area, sampling the noise. I know there's a way of doing it in the hair material as well, but this seems to be the way that would probably be most clean. Yeah, I'll give that a save as well. Clone via fracture, clone via hair. All right, I think that should officially wrap us up. Getting on a half hour over. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and hanging out. As always, we couldn't do this without people coming and asking questions. We had some good questions. I know there's even more questions that we didn't get to, but I look forward to tackling those next week, which should be a normal week. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody. I will see you next time. If you want to support what I do here with these free live streams and like with the What's New videos and the I Wish More Often tutorials, then you can always support on Patreon, where you get all sorts of discounts and you get access to scene files, etc. But for now, I think that's going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, everybody. I will see you next week. Bye-bye. But for now, wrap this up. Thank you.